Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Kody with Up to Code. Now we've been experiencing a pretty good cold snap here in Alberta, Canada, and so we've decided to do a little heat loss test on 4 different homes. So 2 of those homes are ICF right to the roof, and the other 2 are conventionally built. So let's jump into the video and show you what we did. Like I said, it's been pretty cold here, and so it was a perfect time to shoot this video and do these tests. And I've always wanted to do a test on ICF versus conventional and just see the difference. So take the thermostats and turn them way down and just see how long it takes to lose that heat. And that's exactly what we did. Now, in this video, I'm gonna give you also just some thermal imaging or some infrared images. I have some graphs of another test that we did on a commercial building. So that's gonna be at the end of the video. So you're gonna wanna watch all of it. I am going to just kind of speed through this pretty quick, and I got all my notes sitting here. Lots of information. So stay tuned for that. Some infographics at the end as well. And so I'm going to run through the outline of this video right now. So first off, we're going to run through the background information on these 4 homes. We're going to go through really quick, add some photos, show you what each of the homes, give you some specs. Number 2, we're going to run through the test and the results and tell a little bit of a story of how it all went down. There's going to be data, and I have proof of all the stuff, so that'll be included in that. And then 3, we're going to summarize that information just quick, so you don't have to really take notes unless you want to. And then 4 is the bonus information. So the graph from the commercial test that we did, that's a little more in depth, and the infographics and just things like that. So it's tons of information. We're going to show you the differences of why an ICF house is more comfortable than a conventionally built, and you'll see those through the thermal images. And so yeah, let's jump into it. Okay, so background info on these homes. So like I said, there's 4 homes. House number 1, so I'm gonna refer to it as number 1, or my friend Grady. So this is a full ICF house, built right up to the rafters. It was built in 2018. It's 2,150 square foot. It's a bungalow, but it's also on a walkout basement. So the main floor is 2,150, and so is the basement. So you got to add those together if you want the total footage. And then it has the 1,000 square foot attached garage. Now in the basement, there's 4 inches of underslab insulation. So there's the layer of 2-inch foam, and then a layer of vapor barrier, and then the additional second 2-inch layer of foam on top of the vapor barrier. Then we did the in-floor heating, and then of course, you know, rebar and the like and the concrete. This house is basically floor heat in the basement. It has the forced air furnace and an HRV. The roof is just a standard truss roof, R50 blown in, vapor barrier on the ceiling, drywall attached to that, nothing fancy. But this house did achieve very airtight test of 0.23 air exchange per hour that we've done another video on. Triple pane windows, we've never installed a dual pane, so let's put it that way. Triple pane's the way to go, especially when you're building something high efficient. So one thing I want you to keep in mind throughout the video is one of the big differences on ICF versus conventional is the way that the wall system continues on past through the floor, and then the floor on an ICF gets hung off of that. So that continuous insulation carries up past through. Whereas a conventional, it's just foundation, and then the floor sits on that, and everything just kind of stacks on top of each other. And that floor joist on a conventional just always drawing cold through. There's no way to insulate it properly. You'll see those in the thermal images. And another cool thing is Grady's house, we actually did a time lapse, and it was over several months, so it's pretty cool. It's on the YouTube channel, so check that out. You can click the link right there, click it, and you can go to that video. It's pretty cool just to watch it. It's neat, especially like some of the snow melting away, and some of the dirt work too is kind of interesting. Okay, so house number 2 is actually my house, conventional, built in 1978. Now, if you guys would maybe share the videos a little more and subscribe, and I got some more views, maybe I could build my own ICF house. Okay, so let's think about that. So this house is a 1,700 square foot bungalow. There's no attached garage, so the garage is detached. So it's a conventional concrete basement, and the basement isn't even finished, so it's just straight up concrete walls. There's no insulation below the floor or in the basement. So under the concrete slab, there's no insulation. But we're fairly deep in the ground. We're probably at least a good 6 feet. No floor heat. We just have a forced air furnace and that's it. Upstairs on the main is 2x4 framed walls. And I actually do have cedar siding, which I found out after I bought the house, and then vinyl siding on top of that. So on the thermal images, there's not that many of the exterior, but you'll actually see that you don't really see any of the studs transferring through, and that's because we have wood siding and then vinyl on top. So it does add a little bit R value, and dual pane windows. Okay, I don't know how old they are, probably in the 90s, I think. So house number 3 is my friend Graham. We built this house as well. This house was built in 2016. It's a 1,575 square foot. It's kind of a bi-level. So you walk in and then you go up or down. So it's 1,500 square foot of footprint, no garage attached. So with that split entry, the main floor sits a little higher and the basement sits a little higher out of the ground. So it's not as deep. So in this house, same as the other ICF, in the basement, under the concrete floor, there's 4 inches of foam insulation. Floor heat was installed. So if you look in this photo in the very bottom left corner, you can kind of see the heat pipes there. Forced air furnace, you can see, and the HRV is tucked around the left-hand side there. ICF, of course, right to the roof. Triple pane windows, because we're not gonna do anything less. And another thing, so I don't know if you guys recognize the kitchen in this house. We filmed our whole IKEA series in this house, and we set up the kitchen in here. So that's a little background info. So you can watch those videos too someday. So house number 4 is my brother Matt's house. So this house was actually built in 2007. It's probably the closest resemblance of a conventionally built home, or at least in our area. It's something that you would buy even in today's standard, right? It's not that old. It's built with 2x6, kind of what's common now. His house is framed 2 foot on centers, which in carpentry school we learn that's energy efficient because there's less studs and a little more insulation. So his house is energy efficient. So like I said, it's built in 07. It's 1,300 square foot on the main. It does have the attached garage, and it is kind of that bi-level like the last house we looked at. Below the living room area, not that we have a ton of footage there, but there's a crawl space there, and then the kitchen is a little bit higher, and underneath the kitchen is kind of the full basement. But regardless, the footprint is 1,300 square foot. There's no heat in the garage. Now the basement has a 4-foot concrete foundation wall, and then a framed insulated wall, which we would call a frost wall. So you see those basements where they have that ledge in there, that's because half of it's concrete, and then the rest was like a pony wall framed on top of that, and then the floor on top of that, and then everything else above that. So the floor in the basement isn't insulated, and it's probably the most shallow foundation of them all. So we'll get into that a little bit later. There's no floor heat. Above the frost wall, it's 2x6, then the floor system, and then the rest of the house is 2x6, 2-foot centers. So, and dual pane windows. All right, so that concludes the description and kind of the background info on these homes, because it might help you guys kind of decipher the information. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to be able to kind of figure out, okay, like how to equate if one's better than the other or not. We'll let you guys kind of divvy that info up. So now we're going to get into part 2, where we go through the test and all the results and everything like that. So this is where some of those thermal images come in. Tell a little bit of the story of how it all went down, but I'm going to try to speed through this. I don't want to bore you guys. I want to get you the info that you're looking for. All right, so house number 1, Grady's. On January 3rd, right in the new year, my 2 daughters and I, we jumped in the truck. We headed out to Grady's place. It was nice and cold. He had just got home from work, so he was willing to do the test for us. So at that time, it was minus 24 degrees Celsius and a wind chill of minus 36 degrees Celsius. So you can see the time and the date on this photo. It's right at the very top. Just to show you some proof. So here's the forecast for the rest of the week. It's consistently cold. So that's, as you see the tests through the other homes, it was just colder than the dickens, no matter which way you slice it. Also, just note the time and date at the top of that. So we arrived in the evening right before the sun went down. And then by the time we got organized, we started the test at 5:55 p.m. on January 3rd. Now, the interior temp, if you look on the thermostat, was 19.5 degrees Celsius. We were aiming for 21, but I think his program must have buggered it up and the house wasn't up to temp yet. So whatever, we started at 19.5. So throughout the evening, Grady took several videos and he sent those to me. He also recorded the time, the date, and everything, and the temperatures at those various times. I won't probably include all of that. I'll just include the important stuff because, you know, this video is going to take a little time to get through. So in the basement, we recorded, there's 2 thermostats down there. There's floor heat. The starting temperature on the one thermostat was 21 degrees Celsius, and on the other thermostat, it was 22 degrees. Okay, and so sometimes with floor heat, this thermostat will say it's satisfied, but then just that residual heat rising up just knocks it up another little bit. So, okay, so then I tried to be consistent 30 minutes after we shut the temperature off. Then I went around with my infrared gun and took some shots around the house. So we're just going to run through basically what we did. So on the main floor in the kitchen, we took a temperature at the floor. So if you look at the floor, it was 18.3 degrees Celsius. Now, if you look at the photo, the top left corner at the crosshairs is the temperature of where the crosshairs are pointing. And then off to the right is the scale. So there's a scale of temperature there. So it just shows the different colors and what those temperatures mean. Okay, so now low down on the wall is 16.2 degrees Celsius. Midway up the wall is 16.3. Upper wall is 16.1. Now in the top corner on the coldest spot there is 15.1. So it looks bad, but it's only at 1 degree less. And the ceiling is 16.9 degrees there. And on the glass, center of the glass on the windows is 14.4. So on the main floor, if you review those later on, the temperatures, the range isn't that far apart. They're nice and tight. There's no big swings in temperature, which is why an ICF house is nice and comfortable. So we'll get into more later. So in the basement, the floor when we took a shot, now the heat had been off for a bit, so you can't even see the heat lines in there. The heat is dispensed evenly through that slab, if you notice that. So the floor was 17.9. Low down on the wall was 17.2. The mid wall height was 18.1 degrees. So on the upper wall, it's 18.1 degrees as well. But if you look, you can actually see the metal hangers that are in the wall. They're just slightly colder because they're hanging and they're in the concrete to support those joists. Now the hangers I used to use aren't available anymore. So you guys want to pay attention. The new hangers that would equate to those are called a Watkins hangers. So you can order those online. If you drop a note saying that I told you to buy them from him, you might get a discount. Okay, so the ceiling is 18.8 degrees. Oh yeah, and then we took a shot at the hanger there, and it's 15.6 degrees. So it looks bad, but it's actually not, it's not too bad. And on the window, it's 13.1 degrees. So those are all in the basement there. And then we just went around the house. We took some extra shots and just a few things I wanted to note. So in the mechanical room, by the heat lines, nice even heat. You don't even see the lines. You probably would if the system was running and trying to reheat again. So on the mech room floor, it's just nice and warm, toasty in there, 19.8 degrees. Now if you take a look at me, Kody here, I'm looking pretty hot, as you can tell. So I took some exterior shots, but man, it was just so cold out. My gun wasn't working too well and I wanted to get out of there. Okay, so future notes. When we're looking kind of on that parging line near the ground or the grade, I'm going to note this ICF versus conventional. So down on the parging here is minus 27.5. But when you go up a little bit on the wall's still basically the same, minus 27.3. So there's no difference between the wall that's a little bit higher or the wall that's right down at the grade. And that's because it's ICF, it's all continuous, it's all the same wall assembly, and we're not losing heat anywhere, right? So you'll notice it differently on the conventional builds. Now we're going to cut to the chase and get you some results, okay? Basically at 6:45 a.m., Grady wakes up. The thermostat is reading 16 degrees Celsius. So you can actually see the number on the thermostat is the number that the room temperature is on the very far left, that tiny little number, and the bigger number in the middle is what the thermostat is actually set to, okay? So essentially we ended the test at 6:45 a.m. The house had reached 16 degrees. And so we just basically set that number. So it was 20, basically our test was when it hit 16, we shut the test off. Okay. So at this time at 6:45 in the morning, the outside temp was minus 28 degrees Celsius and the wind chill minus 41. So pretty snappy out there. So if you do the math, it's been 12 hours and 50 minutes to drop from 19.5 degrees down to 16. So that's 3.5 degrees. So the basement results, we just stopped the test at the exact same time. So the basement stats read 18.5 degrees Celsius and the other one was reading 19. So almost 13 hours later, one stat in the basement lost 2.5 degrees and the other one lost 3. So that's the first house. Those are the test results for Grady's. Let's swing over to my house next. And what happened there was I was actually going to do my test the next day. But I figured, well, if I did Grady's house at night, and my house is the closest thing in size, I might as well do mine at night and just see how they compare. So that's what we did. So we ripped home. It was cold and windy. Like here's just a little video clip of that I took when we got home. Okay, so you remember my house. This is what it looks like. So again, it was January 3rd, and by the time I started the test, it was 9 p.m. I turned my stat down to 15.5. And I knew my furnace wouldn't kick on. And if you look at the bottom left corner of my thermostat, it also shows the time, just for verification. So the outside temp was minus 25 degrees Celsius with a wind chill minus 38. So then right after that, shut the thermostat down and I set up my time lapse on my GoPro. Then I just ran down to my basement, I threw a thermometer up and took a photo of that and it was 19 degrees. So at 9:37, it was 19 degrees in the basement. All right, so let's run through the infrareds of my house. So 30 minutes after we turned the heat off, then I went around and took some shots. So in the kids' room, the floor, it was 16.1 degrees. So the carpet there kind of helps keep it nice and cozy. Low down on the wall was 13.5. And then low, but in the corner in the coldest spot was 4.6 degrees. Top of the wall was 14.6. The top corner on the coldest spot was 9.4. The ceiling was 16.3 degrees, as you can see, and the window was 9.1. So as you can see, a lot more variation in the colors of those images, and also just the temperature range has a lot bigger swing. Okay, so that's why conventional homes or older homes, whatever, when you're standing or sitting near a window or in the corner, you feel that draftiness. It's because there's cold coming down from the ceiling and from the windows. So we'll zip down to the basement here. Now the floor with actually some carpet that I actually kind of like, it's pretty sweet. The floor was 16.3 degrees. Low wall was 14.8. Mid wall, it was 16.3. So about 2/3 up the wall, it's 14.3 degrees. Now you can see that it's starting to cool off. And that's because that's where my backfill is starting to end and I'm starting to get exposure to the outside air. So at the top of the wall is 10.2 degrees. So you can see that temperature and the color difference. You can actually tell where the concrete's exposed to the elements versus just being buried by dirt. So the underside of the subfloor is 16.9 degrees. But in the joist space up at the very top corner at the coldest spot is 4.1 degrees. So she's real snappy in there. And we can safely assume that the rest of that joist space would be similar to the top of the wall, so around that 10-degree mark. So I want to talk about the joist spaces. So if you jump back to the ICF house, the coldest spot was on the hanger in the mechanical room and it was 16.8 degrees. But the rest of it was all nice and toasty at 19.8. Whereas my floor joists, quite a bit different, right? 10 degrees and really, really cold at that 4 degrees in the coldest spot. And that's just because the ICF wall carries up past through the floor and the floor hangs off of it, right? And that's just a massive difference. I don't have any windows to demonstrate in the basement, but the bare concrete is bad enough. Here's just a few extra shots. So I went out the next day, and you can see that from the outside, that basically where the top of my foundation is, it's just glowing, right? Losing a lot of heat out of there. So for example, I aim it at the brick is showing -34. And then down low near the top of my foundation is -8.5. So you can see that I'm losing a lot of heat out of there. And again, just on the side of the house, -34.1 on the siding, and down low, -12.4. So just, yeah. So let's get back to the test and the results. I want to get this to you quick. I know it's taking some time. Bear with me. From 3:27 a.m. to 3:28, the thermostat drops from 16.5 to 15.5 right away. It just goes bang. So we call that the end of the test. So in conclusion, we started at 9 p.m., ended at 3:30 a.m. That's 6.5 hours. So 21 degrees to 16 in 6.5 hours. And then just for fun, you can see that after that 3:30 mark on the time lapse, it actually kept the house consistent because the furnace was back running. And so I got up at 5:35 a.m. and I checked everything out, and I ran downstairs and took a photo. And so that thermometer was reading at 15 degrees in the basement. Now I set the time wrong on the silly thing, but believe me, it was 5:35 a.m. It was 15 degrees down in the basement. So it's basically safe to say that my basement fell from 19 degrees to 15 in the same 6.5 hours. So that's what we're going to call it. So let's talk about house number 3. This is Graham's house. It's the full ICF that we mentioned earlier. All right, so after I did my test and Grady's test, then the next day I ripped out to Graham's. It was still windy and cold. It was actually -29 degrees that morning with a wind chill of -42. And like I said, it was windy. Take a look. So we started the test at 10:30 a.m. and we turned down the thermostat upstairs, and we also turned off the HRV. We ripped down to the basement and we turned off the in-floor heat, and that was at 10:29. Thermostat was outside temp was -29. Yeah, it was going to stay cold like that all day long. So just keep in mind, also note that that basement thermostat started at 18.5. So that's where he likes to keep his basement. So that's where the basement started at. So 30 minutes after we turned the thermostats down, we went around with the infrared camera, took some shots. So in the entryway, the floor was 15.9 degrees. Low down on the wall was 14.8. Mid wall, it was 15.8. And we actually got a good image here. You can actually see the ties inside the ICF system. And they're not that cold, but just a slight temperature difference shows up on the camera. Upper wall was 15.5. Ceiling is 16.5 degrees. And the window was 14. So those numbers don't vary that far. That range is fairly close to each other. Okay, so living room on the main floor. The floor was 19 degrees. Low wall was 17.8. Mid wall was also 17.8. Upper wall was 17.8. The ceiling was 18.6. And the window was 14.7. So looking pretty good there. Okay, so we ripped down to the basement. So on the floor is 17.7 degrees. Low wall is 15.6. There at the mid wall is 16.6. The upper wall is also 16.6. And again, you can see the metal hangers because we use the same ones that we used at Grady's place. Now remember, the new ones you're going to want to order are called the Watkins. The ceiling is 18.1 degrees. And you can see where I'm pointing right where the joist ends are, which in conventional homes, this would be a cold spot. So, and then for fun, we just hit that hanger again, and it was 15.1 degrees. So it's not as bad as it looks, and the window is 13 degrees. We took a couple quick shots outside that day, but it was just so stinking cold. Basically, it just says it's -40 everywhere. So let's get back to the test and the results for Graham's, house number 3. Basically, Graham had sent me messages and images throughout the day. It gets a little complicated, but I think I made it pretty clear here. We'll get through it. Yeah, so it was awesome that Graham sent me those images throughout the day. He always showed me the time, the date, and the outside temperature, and the reading on the thermostat. So that was huge. So he did that for upstairs, and he did the same for downstairs. So this is where it gets a little confusing, but I tracked it all. So Graham texts me his last picture at 8:54 p.m. So you can see the time and the date at the top. Then he set up the GoPro right after. So I took a picture of a screenshot and all this jazz just to show you guys the proof. So obviously the time lapse didn't take long to drop from 16.5 to 15.5 degrees. So my stat did the same thing, it just did that quick jump. So it only took 10 seconds on the time lapse. But because the thermostat didn't actually have a time on it, I had to use footage from other tests, the commercial job we did, and figure out that 10 seconds of time lapse is 45 minutes in real life. We weren't sure if it was, 45 minutes, so it would have been maybe 9:45 when the temperature hit 16. We just called it 9:30, and also keeps it easy for my math. So we're gonna say that we ended the test at 9:30 p.m. and it was 16 degrees in there. So this means that on the main floor of his house, it took 11 hours to drop from 21 degrees to 16. Now in the basement, same thing. The last picture was taken at 8:54 p.m. The temp was 16.5 degrees on that thermostat. So let's say at 9:30, it was also at 16 degrees. So keep in mind the basement started at 18.5, so we only lost 2.5 degrees over those 11 hours in the basement. So we'll recap this stuff near the end here. House number 4, like it says, my brother Matt. So this is the house. Now remember, this is a conventional house and the closest example to what you would buy nowadays. Now the biggest thing between today and when we were at Graham's yesterday is that the temperature is relatively the same, but there's no wind today. So whether that factors in or not, I have no idea. So we started the test at 6:55 a.m. and you can see the time and the date at the top of the picture there. It was minus 27 degrees Celsius. Now that was at 10:37, and that's when I showed up to take some infrareds and set up the temperatures down in the basement. So Matt has a fancy thermostat. He didn't have any recordings of it. He just looks up on his phone, screenshots it, sends it to me later. So that's what we have for info. So like I said, I went over around 10:30 just to get some infrared. Infrared images were taken about 3 hours after we shut the thermostats down in his house. So it's just the one thermostat, no floor heat. So in the kitchen here, the floor is at 17.4 degrees. Low on the wall is 13.3. Mid wall, you can see, is 15.3 degrees. The upper wall is 16.3, and the top corner on the coldest spot is 7 degrees. Now remember, the coldest spot on the ICF ceiling from house number 1, which was Grady's, was 15.1. So, I don't know, a little bit of a difference there. So his ceiling was 15.8 degrees. And so you can see there's a little bit of a spread over those temperatures, a little wider range versus the ICF, but it's still not bad. It's actually pretty good. Unfortunately, his window was at 3.6 degrees, so that wasn't the best, but dual pane windows, that's why you just never cheap out. You always go with triples. In the basement, on the floor was 18.2 degrees. Low down on the wall in the cold spot was 13.7. Now, like I said, this foundation is fairly shallow, so it's fairly close to the frost, so it's going to start cooling off down low on the wall there. Especially there's no insulation under that floor. Mid wall on the foundation on that frost wall is 17.9, and then right in the corner where it transitions from foundation to pony wall is 10.1 degrees. So those are always a cold spot. The upper area of the pony wall is 18.8 degrees, and the ceiling is nice and warm at 18.7. Now just a few feet to the right, you can see the floor is 16.6 degrees right there. And then close to the wall is 12.6 degrees. And no wonder, like, my brother's always like, man, my feet are always cold when I'm doing laundry down there. And it's, of course, it's just, you can tell by the images, it's cold down on the right near the wall. And that's because the footing is cold. There's no slab insulation. And the way those conventional homes are built, there's just a massive thermal bridge there. And so the basement window in another room is 6.2 degrees. Okay, so I also took some extra shots. Outside you can see the studs through the stucco, and you can also kind of see the floor lines. The kitchen is up high there, and then the living room to the right is a bit lower, and you can see the floor joists through there and all the studs. So in the front of the house, the stonework is reading minus 32.2, and then down low near his parging, right near the top of that foundation, is minus 24.5. So not nearly as bad as my house, but you can still tell that he's losing some heat, whereas the ICFs essentially didn't have any difference there. And on the back of the house, the parging line is minus 18.5. So yeah, losing a little bit of heat, not bad. Now we're not going to pick on the conventional guys too much, but the joist ends are always a weak spot on these homes, and so you can just see that it's warm on the insulation on the joist end, but the perimeter is cold and all the penetrations are cold as well. So back to the test and the results. Matt got a little busy at work. We were finishing a commercial build. At 12:47 p.m., his house was at 16.5 degrees. And then the next shot he took was 2:25 p.m. You can see the time there. It was 15.5 degrees. So I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe we just split the difference and we say at 1:40, his house hits 16 degrees. So you calculate the time backwards. That means it took 6 hours and 45 minutes to go from 21 degrees to 16 upstairs. So in the basement, let's go check out the time lapse, because it's actually just kind of neat to watch. So as you watch the time lapse there, it was 12:15 when the basement dipped down to 16. So the basement actually only took 5 hours and 20 minutes to drop from 21 to 16. So here's a summary of all the results. It just shows how long it took for each home to drop those certain degrees, and you know, basically how many degrees each of them dropped in each location, just because some weren't always at the 21 when we started. So that's the summary, you guys. Now stay tuned to the end, because like I said, we have that commercial job that we did where we did a little bit of a more in-depth test and we spread it out over longer. And that's because on these residential homes, they're fully finished, and I don't want to risk cooling the house down too much and having the house cold and shrink, and all of a sudden there's drywall cracks or something and I got to go and fix it. So I don't want to have that kind of headache. So I was too afraid to drop these residential homes too low. But on the commercial one we did. It was actually pretty cool to see that chart. So this graph shows what happens when you take a commercial ICF building built out of the Nudura XR35 block and you shut the heat off in a cold snap. It was probably close to minus 40, and we shut the heat off for 48 hours. And this graph shows the heat loss for that. So you'll want to check the video out. Here's the title. Here's what the thumbnail looks like. And you can also check the link above. That video is really cool as well. And again, I want your guys' input on the data and how to interpret that data. So let's just jump back into the summary of the 4 homes test. So this is how I look at it. I've filmed videos on the cost of ICF versus conventional, and by my math, it's about 5% more on an entire build. Now, what I want to drive home today is think about, okay, it's 5% more in cost, and I get that question all the time. But by the data that you've just seen, it's not like an ICF is 5 or 10% more efficient. It's obviously substantially more efficient than a conventional build. There's also a ton of other advantages with ICF. Most of the time I can't even name them off the top of the head because there's so many. The continuous insulation, the thermal mass, they're 10 times more airtight. As you can see, if you look at those graphs that I just popped up there, it's obvious how much more airtight and a lot easier to achieve. So another thing to think about as well is if you don't want to pay the price difference, there's nothing you can do to a conventional building that's going to make it equate what an ICF can give you. And an ICF will give it to you in one step, and it's done all at the same time, and it's seamless, and the construction, it's just so simple. I think that people just overthink it, or they don't think it's possible. I don't know what it is. But if you try to make a 2x6 wall or a conventional build similar as ICF, you're going to be adding a whole bunch of labor and a whole bunch of extra materials and steps. And all of a sudden the building science gets out of whack, because now you don't know if you've trapped moisture or not. And are you going to have a rotten building? How's it going to perform? With ICF, it's just tried and true. It's simple, but it's so effective, done in one step. The point of all this is to clearly demonstrate that ICF has far more advantages than what the costs are. Now, if you're worried about costs, Or if you want a budget-friendly home, build it budget-friendly. Do conventional, it's totally fine. But don't take a conventional build and try to make it or improve it or make it more efficient and try to compare to ICF. You'll never do it. It's a waste of time and effort. So take this data and just build ICF right off the start, and you're gonna be so pleased with yourself. And I've never had anyone ever regret that they went and built a full ICF house. So anyway, I'm gonna sign off. Thanks for tuning in. Your input will be handy to help decipher this information. Don't forget to like, subscribe. The videos are helpful. Share them with your friends. We need to get these videos out more. And also, maybe I could build an ICF house someday, and we'll do some super testing on it. So until then, thanks guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one. Okay. Oh my God. It's a lot of talking, my friends. Oh my gosh. Been going off forever, dude. You know how many days? It took me days to gather all this info. Type it all out. Organize it all. How did I say that? Damn it. It's crazy. Okay. Going crazy. It's late. I don't like that. Building and building and building. Build. Man, I am sucking at this conclusion.